Hello friend, welcome to Stories by Tocci. We bring you interesting folk tales. Please don't forget to hit the like button, please share, and don't forget to subscribe to my YouTube channel. Thank you for doing so. Now let's get into the story. The sun pressed down over the city like a hand that wouldn't lift, its heat settling into the concrete and skin with a quiet persistence. Beneath a wide green umbrella at the corner of ODU Road, Grace arranged her fruits with practiced hands, bananas in one basket, oranges in another, pineapples stacked neatly behind. Her wrapper was tied tight around her waist, the ends tucked securely, and her blouse clung to her back where sweat had started to gather. She wiped her face with a hand towel and glanced up every few seconds, eyes alert for new customers. Her stall wasn't just a place to sell fruit, it was a stage. Over the years, she had mastered the balance of charm and control, knowing when to joke with customers, when to look humble, and when to flash a smile that didn't go too far. She understood the streets. They weren't kind to women who didn't know how to hold their own. It was on one of those hot, slow days that Koko first pulled up in his sleek white Lexus. The dust lifted around the tires as he parked a little too confidently, stepping out in his ironed senator wear and black leather slippers that looked untouched by the earth. Grace watched him from the corner of her eye, unimpressed but curious. He walked over with the ease of someone used to being admired, asking for pineapples in a voice that pretended to be casual. "You always stand under this sun like this?" he asked, taking off his sunglasses. Grace laughed softly, brushing her braid from her cheek. "Sun day everywhere, Olga. No be only me day shine for." There was something in the way he looked at her, not just desire, but a calculation, like he was sizing her up. When he mentioned mid-conversation that he was tired of city girls and just wanted a woman who could be a wife material, Grace tilted her head, smiled sweetly, and tucked the information away like a weapon. In her heart, she scoffed. "Wife material, Abi? So you want someone you can lock up like Cold Gary?" She smiled again, this time gentler. "Now a good thing to find wife," she said. That night, Grace lay on her mattress in her small room, a ceiling fan spinning lazily above her, and played the day's moment over and over in her mind. Koko was handsome, clearly wealthy, and not the type to waste time with small talk. But something about his tone had bothered her, the way he said he was searching for a wife, as though he was picking a cow from the market. She had seen men like that before. They praised quietness and humility, but only when it served them. They wanted to be gods in their homes. Grace had escaped one before, an older boyfriend who paid her rent and expected silence in return. This time, she wouldn't fall into the same trap. If Koko wanted to play, then fine, she would play too. And she would play better. "Na drama you dey find," she whispered to the ceiling, lips curling into a slow smile. "I go act him past Genevieve." Grace shifted her entire rhythm without missing a beat. She stopped wearing her usual tight jeans and switched to longer skirts and plain blouses, the kind that whispered modesty. She changed her tone when answering phone calls, lowering her voice and laughing less. Whenever Koko came around, she greeted him with a small bow and offered him freshly cut fruit in a disposable plate, acting every inch the quiet, respectful woman he believed he had discovered. She even stopped going out at night, at least in public. Her usual Friday club visits with her friends were replaced by low-key indoor hangouts, where she laughed over bottles of wine but never shared a single photo online. Privacy became her armor, and manipulation her new lipstick. She didn't trust Koko, not in the way a woman should trust a man she planned to build a life with. She saw through him quickly, recognizing the possessive glint behind his gifts, the way he tested her reactions to comments about women who stayed home. Grace understood the game, and if he wanted a wife material, she was determined to become the best player on the field. Koko, on the other hand, found himself deeply impressed. He liked her silence, her supposed simplicity, the way she never questioned him when he canceled plans or disappeared for 2 days. Her submission, as he called it to his friends, was what he had prayed for. "No stress, no noise," he said to his closest pal, Son, while lounging at a bar in GRA. "She day different. Nah, this kind woman fit build home." What he didn't realize was that the woman he was describing only existed in his imagination, crafted and packaged neatly by Grace to fit a mold she found both ridiculous and dangerous. He continued showering her with gifts, cash in envelopes, a new phone, even paid off her mother's hospital bill without blinking. Grace took everything with gratitude and quiet thank yous, even as she rolled her eyes the moment he drove off. With every gift, she smiled deeper, knowing that she was getting closer to her goal. It wasn't love, not on her part. It was strategy, pure and sharp, and she was winning. With time, their relationship began to move swiftly, almost too smoothly. Koko introduced Grace to his family, praising her quiet ways and calling her his answered prayer. Grace played her part perfectly, kneeling to greet his mother, helping out in the kitchen during family visits, and even volunteering to join in prayers. The approval came easily, and soon talks of marriage filled the air. Her friends warned her to be careful, to stop the act before she got in too deep, but Grace had already made her decision. "Make we enter first," she told them one evening while sipping malt in her backyard. "Then we go see who really gets sense." What no one realized, not even Grace herself, was how tangled she was becoming in the very performance she started. Beneath the calm, the silence, and the sweet smiles was a fire that had not been put out, only buried temporarily under the weight of ambition and revenge. The engagement came like thunder after a dry sky, loud, sudden, and impossible to ignore. One weekend in December, Koko invited Grace to a lunch date at an upscale restaurant in town. The place was all polished wood, clinking glasses, and waiters who whispered. Grace wore a simple cream dress and flat sandals, her hair tied back to complete the image of humility. As they ate, Koko stood and tapped a spoon against his glass. Before she could react, he pulled a small box from his pocket and dropped to one knee. A few heads turned. The other diners clapped lightly as Grace, eyes wide in carefully curated surprise, covered her mouth and nodded. The ring, a modest but sparkling piece, was slipped onto her finger, and she hugged him tightly, whispering, "Yes, yes," as though she hadn't already seen this coming weeks ago. Later that night, in the quiet of her room, she twirled the ring under her bulb's flickering light, not with affection but with calculation. It had worked. The mask was still firm. The traditional marriage followed with speed. Koko's family was eager, and Grace made no delays. Her relatives gathered in her family compound, women wrapping her in layers of lace and coral beads, praising her for finding a man who brought respect and pride to their door. Drums played, and food was passed around in steaming coolers. Grace's aunt cried tears of joy. Her mother beamed at her like a blessing fulfilled. But Grace, inside, felt none of the fluttering hope that marriage was supposed to bring. To her, it was an arrival, a destination, not a beginning. She kept her emotions folded beneath her wrapper, offering sweet smiles and respectful bows. At one point, while kneeling beside Koko for the prayer session, she glanced sideways and caught the faintest smirk on his face. He believed she was his, entirely. And Grace, staring straight ahead, thought quietly to herself, "You don't even know who you've married." The court wedding came last, sealing everything in ink and law. The registrar spoke too quickly, and the witnesses barely listened. Grace signed her name with a straight face, letting the pen glide across the paper with finality. From the outside, they looked perfect, Koko in his tailored navy suit and Grace in her simple white gown, holding hands and smiling for the camera. But under the surface, two lies stood side by side, both cloaked in wedding garments. Koko thought he had outsmarted the modern woman by picking someone traditional, and Grace thought she had beaten the game by becoming what the game wanted. In truth, neither of them was ready for the other. They were two actors, both forgetting that real life starts after the final applause. That night, as they entered their new apartment, well-furnished and cold with unfamiliar silence, Grace hung her veil by the door and walked into the kitchen, not to cook, but to pour herself a glass of wine. She didn't toast. She simply drank, slowly, and smiled into the rim of the glass. The first few days after the wedding passed without noise. Grace moved through the house like a breeze, neither loud nor particularly affectionate, just present. Koko watched her, pleased, assuming her quietness was contentment. She would wake early, walk around barefoot, open windows, and boil water without prompting. It looked like obedience, but in Grace's mind, it was observation. She studied the house, its corners, its silences, and especially the man she had married. She didn't rush to touch or cling. She didn't act like a new bride eager to impress. And when Koko mentioned that she didn't need to worry about working anymore, that he would take care of everything, Grace simply nodded, suppressing a smirk. In her head, she had already started loosening the mask, thread by thread. The play was ending, and the woman he thought he married was fading, slowly but surely. It began one evening after dinner, quiet and unceremonious. Koko walked into the living room to find Grace curled on the couch with a drink in hand. It wasn't wine, it was whiskey, neat, no ice. A playlist hummed softly from her phone, the kind of music that didn't belong in a newlywed's home. She looked up and said, "You want some?" Koko froze, blinking as if seeing her for the first time. "You drink this?" he asked. Grace laughed, a rich, unbothered sound. "Of course. I didn't drink during courtship because I wanted you to think I was what you were looking for. It worked, didn't it?" She took another sip, slowly, her eyes never leaving his. Koko stared, speechless. She looked too relaxed, too sure of herself. No apology, no hesitation. And that night, when he lay in bed beside her, the scent of alcohol still on her breath, he stayed quiet, not because he accepted it, but because he didn't yet know how to react. Something had shifted, and he wasn't ready. The changes didn't stop there. Within a week, Grace had reintroduced loud music to the house, took longer showers while playing songs from her clubbing days, and started making late phone calls in pidgin that Koko couldn't entirely follow. Once, he came home earlier than expected and caught her dancing in shorts, holding a cigarette between two fingers. She saw him, blinked, then put it out without a word. "It's not a habit," she said flatly. "Just something I do sometimes. Don't worry, I've stopped for now. I want to get pregnant." Koko's throat tightened. The woman standing before him, confident, blunt, even a bit defiant, was not the soft-spoken girl who used to sell fruit by the roadside. He felt something collapse inside him, an illusion he had worshipped for months now unraveling with each passing day. He didn't say it aloud, but the thought burned through his mind like fire licking paper. Who is this woman in my house? And what have I done? The tension in the house began to hum like a faulty ceiling fan, barely noticeable at first, then increasingly loud and impossible to ignore. Koko grew quieter with each passing day, his eyes watching Grace more than they ever watched TV. He no longer came home early from work, and when he did, his greetings were dry, stripped of warmth. Grace, unfazed, moved through the house with her chin up and her steps deliberate. She didn't ask him what was wrong. She didn't try to pretend anymore. On Friday nights, she wore her short dresses in front of the mirror and poured herself drinks in fancy glasses. She didn't go out, not yet, but her phone stayed busy with messages, laughter, and playlists full of beats that vibrated through the walls. Koko watched from the bedroom door once, the light from the hallway casting her silhouette against the wall. She looked free. Not like a wife, more like a woman on her own terms. Something about that image disturbed him deeply. One Sunday morning, Koko sat on the edge of the bed with a Bible in hand, flipping through pages without reading. Grace walked out of the bathroom wearing a towel, her hair wrapped in another. As she reached for body lotion, she paused and looked at him through the mirror. "Why are you staring at me like that?" she asked. He didn't answer immediately. "Is this truly who you are?" he finally said, his voice low and tired. Grace met his eyes in the glass, her expression unreadable. "I'm who I've always been," she replied. "You just saw what you wanted to see." Koko's fingers tightened around the Bible's spine. "I didn't marry a woman who drinks like a sailor and dresses like she's single," he muttered. Grace turned to face him fully, still in her towel, arms crossed. "You married what you thought was safe. You wanted a trophy wife to decorate your house while you roamed free. Sorry, dear, that wasn't me." Her words sliced through the silence, sharp and unrepentant. For a long moment, neither of them moved. The room felt smaller than ever. That evening, Koko picked up his phone and began calling family members, his sister first, then his uncle. His voice was strained, almost pleading, as he explained that he might have made a mistake, that the woman in his house wasn't who she pretended to be. But the reactions weren't what he expected. His uncle told him to be patient, to pray, to guide her back. His sister laughed and said, "You two like Rush. Now you dish out." Frustrated, he paced the parlor, the echo of Grace's laughter from a TikTok video in the bedroom bouncing against his nerves. When he finally confronted her again, she was unbothered. "Fine and good," she said calmly. "If you want out, then we'll get a divorce. But remember, it's court marriage. Your properties, we'll split them evenly." Koko froze. The words fell like stones on his chest. He hadn't thought of that. Not once. For the first time since the wedding, panic truly took root in him. Not about losing love. He hadn't come into the marriage for that, but about losing everything else. Grace saw the fear in his eyes. She didn't gloat. She simply turned off her video, tossed the phone aside, and said, "You play games, Koko, but you forget some of us play better." Koko began to unravel in silence. He stopped speaking unnecessarily and developed a habit of locking the bedroom door when Grace wasn't around, as though he feared she might snoop through his things. He backed up his messages, changed his passwords, and deleted conversations he should never have had in the first place. Yet even with all his precautions, guilt hovered around him like a scent he couldn't wash off. He knew what he had done long before he married Grace. Women he had lied to, promised marriage, used, and abandoned. He had always believed he could separate his fun from his future. Grace, he thought, was supposed to be the wall between the two worlds. But now, those worlds were colliding, and he couldn't tell where the line used to be. His side chick in Lecky, a woman named Thelma, had started threatening him. She wanted rent money, a new phone, and a commitment he never promised out loud but always implied. "You think you can just ghost me now that you've locked one girl at home?" she texted. Koko stared at the screen, sweat gathering under his shirt despite the air conditioner humming in the background. Grace, on her end, had already discovered more than she let on. She wasn't reckless, she watched and waited. A message had flashed briefly on Koko's phone weeks ago, a name she didn't recognize followed by a heart emoji. She had taken a quick picture of it with her own phone. Since then, she began piecing together fragments, asking innocent questions, checking the names saved in the contact list of their shared iPad. She wasn't jealous, she was strategic. She didn't need to cry or shout. She just needed enough truth to hold in her pocket, like a weapon tucked into a silk wrapper. One night, while Koko was asleep, she stood beside him quietly, watching the man who once thought her too docile to question him. She held her phone in her hand, scrolling through screenshots, each one painting a clearer picture of who he really was. It didn't hurt her, not in the emotional sense. What it did was give her leverage, and Grace understood better than anyone that in a marriage like this, leverage was power. They stopped talking except when necessary. Koko would eat in silence, his cutlery clinking against the plate like small warnings. Grace never cooked, but she always made sure food was available, from the woman who sold jollof by the junction or from deliveries she arranged. She played music softly now, less out of respect and more out of calculation. She knew he was watching her more cautiously, just as she was watching him. In the evenings, the house felt like a theater during intermission, quiet, expectant, loaded with unspoken lines. Koko considered moving out, but didn't want her to use it against him legally. Grace considered bringing her friends over just to spite him, but decided to wait. Both were trapped in the same performance, each with secrets tangled around their ankles. But the difference was, Grace had stopped pretending. Koko hadn't, and it was eating him alive. The morning Koko decided to involve the elders, the sky was gray and heavy, as if it too was unsure what was about to unfold. He sat at the edge of the dining table, dialing numbers slowly, with pauses in between as though hoping someone, anyone. His uncle in Enugu was the first to pick, offering sleepy greetings and mild confusion before Koko launched into a restrained monologue. "Uncle, I no understand this marriage again," he began, struggling to keep the tremor out of his voice. "She no be the woman way I marry. Everything done change." His uncle listened quietly, murmured something about modern women being too exposed, then promised to talk to Grace's people. Koko hung up, feeling only slightly relieved. One by one, he reached out to the others, his mother, two of his cousins, even the family pastor. But the more he spoke, the more a strange guilt settled into his chest, like smoke curling in tight spaces. Deep down, he knew this wasn't just about Grace changing. It was about him never asking who she really was in the first place. Later that week, a meeting was arranged at Grace's family house. Koko arrived stiffly in a long-sleeved shirt, holding a brown envelope filled with documents he thought might help his case. Grace came late, dressed in a patterned gown with bold earrings, unbothered by the eyes that trailed her as she entered. The sitting room was full, uncles, aunties, cousins, a few elders from both sides. Someone cleared their throat, and the meeting began. Koko took the floor first, laying out his complaints with restraint, the drinking, the change in behavior, the lack of submission. Grace sat still through it all, her legs crossed, face unreadable. When it was her turn, she stood and spoke softly but firmly. "I did not hide. I adapted to the role he gave me. The mistake was not mine. It was his assumption that he could shape me." A murmur ran through the room. Koko's aunt hissed under her breath. But Grace didn't flinch. Then came her final blow. "He wants divorce? Fine. I won't argue. But it's a court marriage. We'll follow the law. Whatever belongs to him, half of it is mine too." The room went cold. Koko's mother shifted uncomfortably in her seat, her mouth slightly open. His uncle adjusted his glasses and leaned back, silent for the first time since the meeting started. No one had expected Grace to come prepared, calm, and unapologetic. Koko, for all his complaints, suddenly looked smaller in that chair, as though the weight of his own trap had finally registered. Grace remained standing, her hands clasped loosely in front of her. "We both came in wearing masks," she said, her voice clear. "But mine came off first. His is still on." With that, she sat down, leaving a silence thick enough to taste. The elders exchanged glances, torn between tradition and the law, between sympathy and truth. Koko felt cornered, not by Grace's defiance, but by the realization that he wasn't the only one who knew how to play the long game. After the family meeting, the house became even quieter, but not in a peaceful way. It was the silence of two people locked in opposite corners, neither willing to make the first move nor the final retreat. Koko no longer ate at home. He left early in the morning and returned late at night, always smelling faintly of cheap hotel soap and exhaustion. Grace noticed but said nothing. She went about her days with a cold rhythm, washing her clothes, replying messages, taking long walks around the compound just to breathe air that didn't feel like tension. Inside the house, the air felt pressed down by invisible hands. The television played to no one. The bed was shared but untouched. 2 toothbrushes remained in the bathroom cup, standing side by side like strangers at a bus stop. They had both made their stands clear, and yet neither had moved forward. Koko waited for her to break. Grace waited for him to snap. But nothing happened. One Wednesday afternoon, Grace sat outside on the veranda, a glass of cold Zobo in one hand and her phone in the other. She scrolled slowly, her eyes distant. The sun hit her cheekbones in soft angles, but her face was unreadable. Deep inside her, she wasn't entirely angry anymore. She was tired, not from pretending, but from being caught in something that was supposed to end quickly. Her plan was never to stay long. She had expected him to grow tired, to throw her out, to let her go so she could leave with half of his comfort and none of the regret. But Koko, in all his stubborn pride, wouldn't budge. And now she felt stuck. Her girls still sent her voice notes, laughing, encouraging her to hold ground. But even their voices felt distant now, like echoes from a game she no longer cared to win. She didn't want love. That much hadn't changed. But this bitterness, this choking quiet, this war with no noise, it drained her. Koko, too, felt himself unraveling in ways he didn't admit aloud. The hotel rooms began to feel like cages instead of escapes. His side flings gave him no peace, just more silence after pleasure. His friends stopped asking how he was. The family, once full of opinions, had gone mute, washing their hands off the drama they could no longer control. Alone in his car one night, parked in front of the estate gate, Koko stared at the house, his house, where a woman he couldn't understand slept on a bed he now feared returning to. He rubbed his temples slowly, overwhelmed. This was not what he envisioned. He hadn't planned for the court documents, the threat of losing his properties, or the mental exhaustion that came with trying to maintain a lie he no longer enjoyed. The irony cut deep. He had set out looking for control. What he found instead was a stalemate where neither love nor power lived, only regret that came too late. The walls inside the house began to feel narrower, as though the building itself was closing in. Grace noticed how time moved slower these days. Mornings dragged, evenings lingered, and the night stretched like something elastic and unbearable. She moved through the space like someone in exile, there but not belonging, breathing but not living. Her routines became mechanical: clean, eat, lie down, scroll through old photos, replay voice notes from happier versions of herself. Sometimes she'd look in the mirror and search her face for any sign of regret, but none came. What did come, often and uninvited, was a strange emptiness. Not sadness, not guilt. Just the heavy knowing that this was not the life she wanted, not the freedom she thought would follow her clever plan. Koko hadn't thrown her out. He hadn't begged her either. He had simply stopped reacting. And somehow, that made everything worse. It was like waiting for an alarm that never rang. Koko, too, lived in a different kind of trap, one of his own design. His morning started with headaches and ended with silence. The hotel rooms began to cost more than he budgeted, but he couldn't return to sleep in that house with Grace. He missed his own bed, his own kitchen, the comfort of familiarity. Yet he couldn't forgive the mirror Grace had become, reflecting back all the hypocrisy he tried to hide. He'd wanted a wife who would obey, sit still, raise children quietly while he explored the world outside their home unchecked. Instead, he got someone who matched him in game, in strategy, and in pride. He replayed every warning his sister had given him during courtship. The one time she said, "Are you sure she's not just playing along?" He had waved it off then, too sure of himself. Now, every choice he had made felt like a misstep on a staircase he built with his own hands. And the weight of that realization pressed harder than he was ready for. Neither of them made moves toward divorce. Not yet. The law loomed like a shadow over every decision, reminding them that walking away wouldn't be clean. Assets were tangled. Reputation was at stake. And deeper than that, some quiet part of both of them still wanted to win. Not win each other back, but win the argument. The idea that walking away meant surrender. So they stayed. Two people in one house, tied by paper, bruised by pride, and hardened by the games they played too well. At night, the generator's hum filled the compound, but it couldn't drown the silence between them. Grace sometimes sat by the window with a cup of tea she didn't drink. Koko lay in hotel beds that didn't smell like home. And both wondered, without ever saying it aloud, how something so planned, so carefully constructed, had turned into a prison neither could escape without bleeding. The decision came quietly, not with shouting or sudden revelations, but with an envelope on the center table and a note beneath it in Grace's handwriting. "I'm tired. Let the lawyers handle it." Koko stared at the papers for a long time, his body still, his chest hollow. The light in the sitting room was dim, casting long shadows that danced against the cream walls. He didn't open the envelope immediately. He just sat, elbows on his knees, the weight of it all pressing down. This wasn't how he imagined it would end, not with silence, not without a final argument where he could at least defend himself. But Grace had stolen even that from him. She had taken away the last stage for performance. Now only reality remained. This house he no longer found comfort in, the possessions he was about to split, and the haunting truth that everything had started with a lie he told himself, that he could control another person and walk away untouched. Grace didn't wait around for his reaction. By the time Koko returned home that day, she had already packed a single bag and left, not with drama, but with finality. She didn't slam the door. She didn't cry. She left behind the wedding album, untouched perfume bottles, and the carefully curated image of the woman he once thought he married. Her ride picked her up quietly, and she moved into a temporary flat she had already secured through a friend. That evening she lit a candle, not for mood, not for prayer, but for light, because the new place didn't have electricity yet. She sat cross-legged on the cold tile floor, the legal documents in a file beside her, her phone silent for once. There was no victory dance, no laughter, no thrill, just stillness. She had one, perhaps, in the eyes of her friends, but what she felt was something else entirely, a soft, sobering clarity that even when you beat someone at their own game, there's still a price to pay. And sometimes it's peace. Koko never chased after her. Not because he didn't want to, but because he no longer knew what to say that wouldn't sound like another performance. The days that followed felt like punishment carved in silence. The house remained, but it felt smaller. He still had his business, his money, but none of it tasted the same. When his lawyer finally called to discuss the property terms, he agreed without much resistance. Not because he was gracious, but because fighting felt heavier than letting go. He had started the game thinking he was the smarter one, the man with the plan. But all he had now was a divorce file, a house full of shadows, and a name that didn't carry the same weight in conversations anymore. In the end, it wasn't just the marriage that collapsed. It was the illusion of control, the pride that blinded him, and the quiet truth that sometimes the mask you give others to wear is the one that ends up suffocating you. Hope you enjoyed this interesting story. Please don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to my channel. See you again in my next story.